We're really delighted that people could make it to tonight's event, traffic and all. Tonight's Crimson Courage event inside Harvard, Strengthening Academic Freedom with Crimson Courage. And before we start, I'd like to let us remember those who came before us in our land acknowledgement. The Harvard Club of Boston is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, both past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Well, my name's Matt Haggerty, college class of 1982, past president of the Harvard Club of Boston. And before we start, I'd like to recognize our immediate past president, Marcus de Florimont, who yesterday won the HAA's 2025 Outstanding Volunteer Leadership Award. So Marcus in absentia, nice job. And you know, Marcus is really good about making connections with the community, and people ask me, well, what's my connection to Harvard and the Harvard Club of Boston? Well, I grew up in Watertown, and my grandfather, who never got out of 8th grade, he used to be a chauffeur for the Reisinger family. So, and that's how we, you know, put the bug in my ear about Harvard this and Harvard that. And he lived right around the corner on Belvedere Street, and then he moved to Hemingway. My parents met in the Back Bay. My father used to deliver mail to the Harvard Club of Boston. He was a mailman. And I used to take the Dudley bus, Patty, from Harvard Square to Symphony. And then I said, oh, the Harvard Club's here. Great. And then more than that, I learned later that I could join as an undergrad for 25 bucks and buy Heinekens at 75 cents a pop. So that's that connected me to this community. And I officially joined in 1983. But it was only until recently, and never did I ever imagine would be convening here at our beloved club, or anywhere else on campus for that matter, to discuss the testing and jeopardizing of academic freedoms. You know, this is, you know, 5 years ago, this would have been unheard of. You know, these perils are real, and they become more onerous every day. And I learned yesterday at the Alumni Leadership Conference in Cambridge that the federal government has 21 active investigations against the university. This is our own government. And they seem to be relentlessly determined to see Harvard fail. And, but with this organization, I'm seeing the same vigor and resolute resistance. So, and hereby is formed, of course, Crimson Courage, you know, which has emerged in response to these attacks. This is a group of Harvard alumni who've joined together to support and mobilize the community, including all of us here tonight, and in championing academic freedoms, constitutional and human rights, civil liberties and democracy in our great country. And there's no one better to explain the mission and vision of this undaunted alumni organization than Miles Rappaport, the co-chair of Crimson Courage. Miles is a prominent advocate for democratic issues. He's held several positions in both government and policy organizations. He graduated from Harvard in 1971, the last class where everyone who applied got in. And he was an anti-war student and leader during this time. He served as a Connecticut state legislator from 1985 to 1994, and as the Connecticut Secretary of State from 95 to 98. He headed Public Policy Center, Demos, for 13 years. This is a non profit public policy organization working to build a just, inclusive, multiracial democracy and economy. And in addition, Mr. Rappaport was president of Common Cause from 2014 to 2016. Excellent. He is a co-author, along with Washington Post columnist and fellow Harvard grad, E.G. Dionne. The book, 100% Democracy, The Case for Universal Voting, was published in March of 22. And lastly, he served as a senior practice fellow in American democracy at the Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. So Mr. Rappaport really exemplifies a dedicated life to public service, speaking truth to power, and at Harvard, that's veritas ad potentiam. And we're delighted to have him introduce our moderator and panelists this evening. Miles, welcome.
Matt, thank you very much for that really nice introduction, and we are all, I think, really delighted to be here tonight. So I want to first, before I start talking a little bit about Crimson Courage, acknowledge that there are several other key members of Crimson Courage that are here tonight. So first, Patty Nolan, who is the co-chair along with me. You will meet her shortly. Marion Dry, who is one of the leading voices in Crimson Courage. Evelyn Kim, who does our communications work. By the way, all volunteer, okay? And Lou Finfer, who was one of the first co-chairs of Crimson Courage. So, Lou, thank you very much. Let me just say that I have been working. I am not really a higher education or a Harvard-centered person. I have been working on democracy issues, whether in politics or in advocacy, for the last 40 years. And I never really felt that Harvard was the place that needed whatever political energy that I had. Or money, for that matter. But in March and April, when the Trump administration decided to attack Harvard, and all of a sudden Harvard became the kind of front line of the defense against authoritarianism, and one of the leading kind of efforts of the Trump administration in the authoritarian playbook, which Stephen Levitsky knows all about, I felt called, I really felt called to say, this is something we have to do. This is a place where, if you're a Harvard graduate, you have leverage, we have a fight to make, and we should all make it. So, group got together. This is April, so the whole group is only 6 months old. And our first step was to say, this was before the April 11th letter, was to say, how can we pressure Harvard not to cave, so we said, as other universities have done. And then lo and behold, 3 days after we had that first call, strategizing all kinds of ways we could needle Harvard, lo and behold, Harvard decided it was going to reject the April 11th letter, go to court, and sue the Trump administration. So all of a sudden, this was flipped on its head to say, rather than pressure Harvard, we want to support Harvard. So over the last number of months, starting in May with a webinar and stickering, you see my Crimson Courage sticker. You don't have to pay dues to wear it. You may just put it on. We decided that we should both sticker at the commencement, have a rally during the Alumni Day, put together a whole set of activities that were there. And we have continued to say, how can we support Harvard, and how can we push Harvard to continue to demonstrate courage, even under the pressure that they are under, okay? So we did an amicus brief in the court case that actually had 12,000 signatures. I think, as Evelyn told me earlier today, this was the largest number of signatures on an education-oriented amicus brief in history. We had a letter that said to Harvard that said, don't cave in. That had 17,000 people. We now have 18,000 members of Crimson Courage who are on our mailing list. And the fight continues, okay? So as those of you who read the New York Times know that every week there's been Harvard's about to make a deal. Inside sources close to the negotiations say, which always turns out to be Stephen Miller or somebody else in the Trump administration. So anyway, fast forward, here we are in October. Harvard has not caved, and we are very, very both proud of it. But at the same time, Crimson Courage has a second goal, which is to push Harvard not just to not sign a settlement, but they have done some things that I would call anticipatory acquiescence. The jettisoning of the DEI program, maybe it's a renaming, maybe it's full of content. But if you no longer have the helpline for the LGBTQ students and you no longer have a women's program that says to women that they have a place they can go, that's content. That's not words. And so we also want Harvard to not only continue to resist Trump in their extortionate efforts, but also to say, let's look carefully at what we've already done, and are there ways that we can make recompense? Because I think they can. Okay. Going forward, we have two goals. One is to continue to deepen our relationship with Harvard alums, and let me say clearly, there is a postcard on your seat. If you are not currently a member of Crimson Courage, please sign up, crimsoncourage.com. We would love to have your support, not financial, just being with us. But the second thing is, so the first is to deepening our commitment and continuing to push Harvard not to give in. But the second thing is that it's very interesting. At the very beginning of our efforts, we said, we really have to be careful because I apologize if this offends everybody, but not everyone in the country loves Harvard. But they do now. It's very interesting. So we want to deepen our commitments at Harvard, continue to do it. But the second thing is that we want to help catalyze a national movement of alums to say, we support institutions that demonstrate courage in this time of crisis. Okay? And furthermore, what we want to do is have alumni unite with what we call the 5 pillars of higher education, which are students, faculty, staff and their unions, the communities that surround the universities, and alumni. And if we can, on every campus that is seeing this pressure, get that kind of a coalition together, we'll be doing some really good work. So that's something that Crimson Courage is going forward. Okay, let me stop there, and let me introduce Patty Nolan, who is my beloved co-chair of Crimson Courage. I want to thank all of you for coming. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of challenges ahead. This is not a short-term fight, even if Trump backs off on this. This is a long-term fight because it is part of the authoritarian plan to bring higher education as a source of knowledge, free thinking, and opposition to heal. And we can't let them do that. So let me introduce Patty Nolan, who is a Cambridge City Councilor, the co-chair of Crimson Courage, a member of the class of 1980, and generally speaking, just a wonderful human being. Patty.
Come on up. I'm going to go over here. So, yes, I'm Patty Nolan. Thanks so much. Thank the Harvard Club for having this. It's really exactly what we hoped would happen with Crimson Courage, whereas there will be interest around the country in what is going on. So just a few remarks from me, let you know. I'll open us up, give a very brief bio, and then we'll actually hear from the people you came here to hear from. As delightfully wonderful as I am and Miles, I think these are the 2 stars of the show. So,
I represent that.
Yeah, okay. So we are really here in extraordinary times. Higher education is literally under attack. What do you want? Closer? Okay.
No, sorry.
This is your mic, I think is what he's saying.
Put it on?
Yeah.
I didn't take it off.
And in that higher education, Harvard is absolutely a clear target. And that's good news and bad news, right? It's good because people recognize we are literally alums of the university that is most world-renowned in the entire world and does the most amazing research and has amazing work that is done, an incredible alumni group, right? We have former secretaries of state. We have everybody across every single sector of the economy in the world you can think of. So that's a reason it's a target, but that also makes us a target that is very challenging because very much of the actions that have been taken are front and center on Harvard in order to, if Harvard folds, then everyone else will. Just a couple points. The letter and the subsequent demands of other universities have affected all elements of higher education. And most recently, the compact, which I think we've heard of, created a national stir. And it continues to focus attention on the Trump administration actions. 7 of the 9 have rejected it. MIT, right across the way. Let's give it up for MIT. Sally Kornbluth's letter was astonishing and exactly on point. But also, the Cato Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, I mean, there are institutions across the political spectrum who have recognized that the compact is a non-starter and should be a non-starter for any university or college in the whole country. So what that indicates, though, that the compact is still being bandied about is that this attempt to shape higher education, we know, will continue. And Harvard, as the preeminent institution, will continue to be front and center. And I want to say what's really amazing government that says they're pro-American, attacking Harvard is literally attacking America. We are one of the best known things in the world, and so attack Harvard is attacking American. So the 2 speakers here tonight, I'm not going to read their entire bios because they said don't. However, we should at least know who they are. So we're going to hear first from Professor Steve Levitsky, David Rockefeller Professor of Latin American Studies, Professor of Government, lots of different things in his bio. I think the key is he is co-author of a book called How Democracies Die and Tyranny of the Minority, Why American Democracy Reached the Breaking Point. Incredibly relevant to today. And he's currently working on a book on democratic resilience around the world. He will set the stage, and then we'll hear from Archon Fung, who is at the Kennedy School of Government. Title is Winthrop Laughlin McCormick Professor of Citizenship and Self-Government. Research focusing on policies, practices, institutional designs that deepen the quality of democratic governance. So you can read much more about their bios. Just know that it was their call that I should not go on at length. We'll hear from them to set the stage, first on democracies and then on what's going on inside Harvard. I'll start off with a question, think now of questions, and then we'll go to audience questions.
Okay. You hear me okay? Yes. So first of all, let me say thanks for organizing this and for having us. And I really cannot say how meaningful it is to know you guys are out there doing what you're doing. It's been, at times, kind of a lonely existence being at Harvard. We felt pretty abandoned by a lot of people. And knowing that you guys are doing what you're doing is just, it's meant a tremendous amount to all of us. So thank you. I'm gonna, as Patty said, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what's happening nationally and then hand off to Archon and talk a little bit more about Harvard universities. As you all know, and as several of you have already mentioned, this country is sliding into authoritarianism. Those are words that, and I've worked on this stuff for 30 years, and words I never thought I would utter. We're not sliding into fascism, probably. We're not sliding into single-party rule, but we are sliding into what Luke and Wei and I call competitive authoritarianism. This is a political system in which parties continue to compete in elections, but systematic incumbent abuse of power tilts the playing field against the opposition. So instead of banning opposition, instead of canceling elections, governments in competitive authoritarian regimes weaponize state institutions, government institutions, and deploy them to punish critics, to weaken their rivals, and to bully the media and civil society onto the sidelines. This is what autocrats did in Russia, in Turkey, in Hungary, El Salvador, Venezuela, and it's what Trump is doing today. At the heart of competitive authoritarianism is the weaponization of government. Autocrats purge key government agencies of civil servants, they pack them with loyalists, and then they deploy those government institutions against opponents and the media. And we've seen this across the board, as you know, in the Trump administration, right? The Justice Department was purged, it was politicized, and now hundreds, literally hundreds, of Trump's critics and opponents are under investigation or even indictment. Public figures like Jim Comey, Letitia James, Jack Smith, Adam Schiff, Democratic Party donors, Democratic fundraising platforms like AdBlue, foundations like the Open Society Foundation, a major funder of civil society. The government has gone after media outlets through investigations and defamation suits. It has blacklisted law firms with ties to the Democratic Party. It's launched investigations, as you know, into dozens of universities and illegally stripped universities like Harvard of research funding. So individuals and organizations across this country are now being punished for being on the wrong side of the government. One question I want to briefly touch on, because it's a difficult one, is how do you actually know when you've crossed the line into authoritarianism? It's debated. It's difficult to tell in competitive authoritarian regimes because there aren't yet, anyway, tanks in the streets. There hasn't been a military coup. We still have Congress and elections and a constitution and courts. So it's oftentimes difficult to know when you've crossed the line. So I just want to suggest a simple metric. And that is, how costly is it to engage in legal opposition? In a democracy, legal, peaceful opposition should be pretty close to costless. In a democratic society, we don't have to think twice about writing a critical op-ed, about organizing a legal protest, about giving money to an opposition candidate, running for office, speaking out against the government. Because we don't think twice about it, because there is no risk in a democracy of government retribution. Under authoritarianism, opposition comes with a price. And that is what's happening in the United States today. Government critics now know that they run a risk of being a target of investigation. Media owners know that they could face lawsuits or investigations. Democratic Party donors know that they could face IRS investigations. Law firms that work for Democrats know they may get blacklisted. Universities know they could face crippling funding cuts. They have. Foundations know they could lose tax-exempt status. And Republican politicians, and this may be worst of all, Republican politicians know that they could face threats of physical violence if they oppose Trump. So there is now a clear cost to opposing the Trump administration. Literally hundreds of thousands of Americans who might have engaged in some form of legal opposition behavior are now at minimum thinking twice about it because they know there's a risk associated with that opposition. As I think Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski put it best when she said a couple of months ago, and I quote, "We are all," this is a Republican senator, she said, "we are all afraid." That's quite a statement. But we're in a time and a place where I certainly have not been before. I'll tell you, I'm oftentimes very anxious, a Republican senator, I'm oftentimes very anxious about using my voice because retaliation is real. The threat of government retaliation is now visibly changing Americans' behavior. Major law firms have stopped doing pro bono work for progressive causes. Donors are now shying away from Democratic Party candidates. Universities have virtually eliminated students' right to protest out of fear of government attacks. Columbia and UVA fired their presidents under government pressure. Jeff Bezos changed the Washington Post editorial line, turned it into a center-right newspaper because of anticipated response by the government. CBS News has changed its editorial line and its programming content, and thousands of politicians, CEOs, religious leaders, and university presidents have begun over the last 9 months to silence themselves because they fear government retribution. That suggests, at least to me, that we have crossed the line into some form of authoritarianism. And it could get worse. I still think this is very reversible, but just to say it, it could get worse. The transformation of ICE into a paramilitary force is unlike anything I've seen in most contemporary competitive authoritarian regimes. We now have, in the United States, masked men coming out of unmarked cars abducting people on the streets. And we have, of course, U.S. troops in cities. Last month, the President of the United States told our nation's top military commanders to refocus their attention on internal enemies in U.S. cities. The most powerful military on the face of the earth is being told to wage what Trump calls a war from within. That's Pinochet stuff. That's literally the language that South American dictatorships used in the 1970s. This should not be happening. The United States, as you all know, has powerful institutional and societal bulwarks against authoritarianism. We have the world's oldest, most successful constitution. We have a strong bicameral legislature, a strong independent judiciary, robust federal institutions. We also have a really strong civil society. The United States has a big, wealthy private sector, 22 million millionaires. God, I got in the wrong profession. 22 million millionaires in this country. There are dozens of private law firms in this country that earn at least $1 billion a year in revenue. There are hundreds of independent newspapers or media outlets. There are more than 1,700 private universities. We have a vast infrastructure of churches, labor unions, private foundations, and nonprofits. There is more than enough muscle in this society to blunt Donald Trump's authoritarian offensive. But so far, America's political, business, and civic elite has failed to step up in defense of democracy. Not you guys, but in general, the U.S. elite has not risen to the challenge. Most of our country's political and societal leaders have capitulated, have acquiesced, have retreated to the sidelines. There's a word for this, and we're writing a book on this. There's a word for this. This word is going to be in the title, and the word is abdication. Democratic abdication occurs when those who have both the authority and the responsibility to defend or uphold democratic institutions fail to do so. The United States Senate abdicated when it acquitted Donald Trump for January 6th. The Supreme Court abdicated last year when it derailed the federal cases against Trump and granted him instead vast immunity. Congress abdicated its oversight role when it confirmed authoritarian cabinet picks in December, and when it remained silent as Trump repeatedly violated the Constitution in the first half of 2025. Media companies like Paramount and Disney abdicated when they settled flimsy lawsuits rather than standing up for press freedom. Top universities abdicated when they acquiesced to Trump's authoritarianism rather than defend academic freedom. Law firms abdicated when they made deals with Trump rather than defend the rule of law. And business, labor, religious, and other civic leaders abdicated when they chose to remain silent in the face of blatant authoritarian abuse. This is not how you defend democracy. Trump did not seize power in this country. We ceded it to him. I want to suggest that abdication facilitates authoritarianism in a couple of ways. First of all, it has a clear enabling effect. When we as a society and as an elite acquiesce to authoritarian measures like prosecuting critics, extorting law firms and universities, bullying media, sending troops into cities, when we acquiesce to that, we expand the authoritarian toolkit by making previously unacceptable behavior suddenly acceptable. The more tools that you give autocrats, that you permit autocrats to have, the more damage they will do over time. Secondly, abdication has a signaling effect. When public officials acquiesce to authoritarian acts, that tells citizens, that tells everyday Americans that those acts are acceptable, that they're normal. When governments cross red lines without any serious public resistance, it normalizes behavior that should not be normalized. It was once considered unthinkable. And when our most prominent billionaires and media companies and law firms and universities acquiesce to authoritarian demands, it sends a message to the rest of society that resistance, forget it, it's futile. Because if billionaires and senators and Ivy League universities can't stand up to Trump, what chance do the rest of us have? That's a very, very powerful signal. Trump launched his authoritarian offensive last year because the Senate and the courts failed to hold him accountable for his effort to overturn the 2020 election. And the authoritarian offensive accelerated beyond what most of us thought imaginable, including me, and I was a pessimist. It has accelerated beyond what most of us thought was imaginable because politicians, CEOs, law firms, judges, media companies, and universities acquiesced to his initial demands. When you cede ground to autocrats, they take it and then they come back for more. We are beginning to see some societal pushback. We saw it in the Jimmy Kimmel case. We saw it with MIT and Brown and Penn and other universities' recent rejection of the compact. We saw it in the No Kings protest. But the richest and most powerful and most influential among us have to get in the game. Autocrats never stand down on their own. They have to be challenged. They have to be beaten politically. No one, to my knowledge, no one has ever defeated an autocrat from the sidelines. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. That was just terrific, Steve. Thank you very much. So I think what I'll do is I'll make some points and share my views about what's happening on campus and how it feels. And, you know, I'm no more qualified than Steve or anybody else who spends, you know, their days
very
on
qualified
campus to talk about that. And then maybe I'll say some things about the Harvard situation as maybe a case study of partial acquiescence that may reflect what's happening in other institutions as well, what the dynamics are. Although I hadn't planned to address it that way, but it's a great question that you pose. So some things that might not like be on the headlines about what's happening on campus that I'm feeling anyway that I wanted to share is, first of all, I have the strong impression that there's a pretty big chilling effect on campus about what people can say and what they can't say, and what they're comfortable saying and what they're not comfortable saying. And, you know, I'm a political theorist. I've been studying about a chilling effect basically my whole career, 25 years, 30 years. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've really felt like I've understood it, because I feel like I see it happening around me. So some of the dynamics are external and in the political environment. So if you come to the Ash Center, which I encourage everyone to do, we have a super nice coffee machine. I'll have a cup of coffee with you. You will notice that it's locked down. You need a Harvard ID to get in. If you take a closer look, you'll notice that there are security cameras scattered all around. And if you take an even closer look, you'll see that there are panic buttons installed near people's offices. And 3 or 4 of our faculty are on Turning Point USA's professor watch list and have gotten death threats and other kinds of threats as a result of that. So that certainly feeds into the chilling effect, the external environment. And then I've also, I don't really feel it that much myself because I'm a tenured professor and, you know, who cares really? But there are populations, including colleagues, but certainly students and staff especially, who are African American or certainly non-US students and staff who aren't citizens, faculty who aren't citizens, and LGBTQ people. And I'm sure that they're feeling much more pressure. I've made a point to try to have lunch with every African American colleague that I have on the faculty, which doesn't take very long because they're less than the fingers on one hand, contrary to popular impression. And it is a different reality. Black faculty, especially women in the post-Claudine gay era, are afraid of being targeted in multiple ways. They're really worried that somebody's going to run an AI and see whether they plagiarized anything in the, whatever, thousands of pages that they've written or arguably plagiarized. It's like an environment that is quite different. And I think, everything that Steve said about the authoritarian impulse to suppress dissent and political opposition is absolutely true. And I want to add to that a different layer, an additional layer, which is about identity and the particular identity. It's not really quite the authoritarian impulse to attack blackness or black leaders or to claim that there are only two genders and erase people who have other identities. But that is a part of what's going on now and a very real part of what's going on campus. And so the chilling effect is the first thing. The second thing, and I don't know if, Steve, you share this view, I think it's really, like in any organization, in your workplace, in your nonprofit, in a movement organization, right? Part of what people are trying to do sociologically is figure out what the organization stands for, what are its values, and then to be a good member, upstanding member of that organization, you try to align with those values and do your bit to advance them, right? And because of the political environment and how my impression of how leadership has chosen to engage with that political environment, they're playing their cards pretty close to the vest. And so it's kind of hard to know what Harvard stands for at this moment. And, that's pretty abstract, but let me give you an example. I think for at least the last 15, 20 years that I've been here, there's been at least I thought it was a pretty deep level consensus, but now I'm thinking maybe it was just a surface level consensus and words, that Harvard has been a long 350-year journey. And at the beginning, the only people who could be at Harvard were Protestant sons of very wealthy families. And then expanded a little bit, and pretty soon W.E.B. Du Bois could be there, and other black people could be there, and then women could be there, not just at Radcliffe, but at Harvard College. And then eventually Jewish quotas were lifted, and then more Jewish people could be there. And even though we had achieved some measure of diversity, it was still difficult for some people to be there because maybe their parents didn't go to college, or maybe they didn't have a lot of money, or maybe they were from other kinds of socially marginal populations, and we're trying to do something about that too. And that was our values. We were engaged in that as an enterprise, as the greatest university in the United States and maybe in America. And now it's just no longer clear to me whether or not that is a shared value at all. Are we trying to do that, or are we trying to do something else? And there have been very ambivalent signals from above, from outside, from all around about what the commitments are in that regard, right? So what is our North Star? I think it's just hard to tell. I mean, it might still be that. I just don't know, right? Or at least it's hard for me to navigate, right? So what are Harvard's values? A third dimension that I don't know if you understand the operation of the university to be this way, but Steve and I as long-term faculty members surely do, is that most universities, and certainly Harvard for the whole time I've been there, has a process of shared governance, right? So any policy of any substance, of any magnitude, it takes a long time to make it. And you've got to do a lot of consultation. And maybe you have a faculty committee and their staff representation and their students. Maybe you just want to change the email policy. You still have to do that. And then you have to write a 30-page memo and get a lot of commentary on it. And then that memo becomes advice to the president and provost. And they take it under consideration, and then maybe they adopt it or not to change the policy, right? It's like a very public and deliberative, to a fault, to pain and slow policymaking and so on. All of that has changed dramatically since the Trump administration and the attacks, because I think leadership feels like they've got to pivot to a difficult external environment, and everything that you say internally is subject to discovery. There's a lot of good reasons why that's changed, but it is a dramatic change. So now, you change policies about inclusion, and you don't know exactly why that is or where it's going, because part of the strategy is we can't explain it to you, because then that'll be subject to a lawsuit, and there'll be evidence, and we'll get bashed about the head and shoulders for that. You close a couple of centers on Middle Eastern studies, and why is that? Is because the leadership was bad, because the programming was bad, because the finances were off kilter? I don't know. Or was it because they didn't have the right views about Palestine and Israel? Like, I just honestly do not know, because there hasn't been that committee that looked at it for a couple of years and wrote the memo that everybody commented on and that went up as a suggestion to the Office of President. Like, that didn't happen, right? So shared governance and transparency and deliberation to a fault has been almost reversed 180 degrees because of the difficult campus environment that we're in. Okay. So just a few more comments. One is, I said in a faculty meeting to the dean and a couple of other people that one of the difficult things about this moment is that Harvard in the past has been like GM. That quote about what's good for GM is good for the country. Like, so that's been true for Harvard too. But right now in this moment, we may come to a point at which what's good for Harvard is not necessarily good for the Republic. So do all of us, do our students, do we as faculty do what's good for the Republic, or do what's good for Harvard as an institution? And so this is like a really painful kind of imaginary, but imagine that, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we slide into a pretty bad kind of authoritarianism. Maybe not just competitive, but straight up authoritarianism. Would you, as proud alumni of the organization, rather have a Harvard that is the size that it is, with the prestige that it has, but completely aligned with that authoritarian administration and whatever it wants? And certainly that depends on the substantive question of what it wants, and I'll say more about that in a moment, but I think it's not good. Or would you rather have a Harvard that's the size of Wellesley College, but still has some latitude for dissent every once in a while and freedom of thought? Like, run that thought experiment through. A little story, there's Adam Pravorsky wrote this in he has a great Substack. He's a very famous political scientist, scholar of democracy, and he's been writing reflections on the moment. And he put in his Substack this passage from a book by Peter Drucker, in which Drucker is observing the rise of Nazi Germany. And it's a passage about a faculty meeting at Frankfurt University. And according to Drucker, who's maybe not the most reliable observer, but whatever, narrator. But anyway, Drucker says, okay, Frankfurt University at the time was the most liberal, progressive university in Germany, very prominent. All the other academics knew if Frankfurt fell to the Nazis, everyone would as well. So he's recounting this the faculty meeting in which the Nazi, commissar comes and says, he's like dressing down all the faculty, and he points at all the department heads, and he says, you have to do what I say, and if you don't, everything I say, otherwise it's the concentration camp for you. And then during the question and answer, a prominent faculty member who's a biologist, who's known as a very progressive liberal thinker, raises his hand, and he says, well, Mr. Commissar, that's very illuminating and provocative, and thank you for coming and explaining what the situation is. I just have one question for you. Will there be more money for biology? And then, according to Drucker, after the meeting, the commissar says, yes, there will be more money for biology if it's a racially pure kind of science. Right? And so, I think that these kinds of possibilities, I hope it doesn't go there for Steve's reasons of the vast resources in the United States, civic and otherwise. I think there's a good likelihood that it won't. But I think what's happened to date on the part of all of us is a failure of imagination of what the possibilities are, right? Okay, so two more points. Another point is, and I think this has probably been on your minds, it's certainly been on mine, how do we deal with relatively sensible, colorable arguments about the flaws of the university and higher education that are made in very bad faith? So let me give you 3 examples of those. One is arguments for free speech and our criticisms of cancel culture. I'm a pretty absolute free speech person whenever I've been in a position of authority and challenging speakers have come up. I've never said no. I think it's a good thing for the university. And certainly, this is a criticism from the right, but the universities are not a space of free speech. It's a place of cancel culture. But what do you do with that criticism when it becomes obvious that it's being made in extremely bad faith? And, a piece of evidence for this, after the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, people get fired for saying what they thought of what Charlie Kirk actually did on campuses. And I think Steve Bannon offered the most honest account of that. Somebody said, well, we thought you guys were for free speech and against cancel culture. He says, no, we're for winning. And when we were on the losing side of the free speech debate, then we were for free speech because we need to be able to say things. But now we're in a position that when other people say things that we don't like, we don't have to tolerate it, and we can win, right? So the principle is not free speech, it's winning. A second argument that is colorable and reasonable, but being made, I think, in bad faith, is the argument that universities need to be places of civil discourse. That, there's too much yelling, there's too much not listening to one another. I like civil discourse. I like politeness. It's great. And so in the compact, right, one of the passages is, a requirement is that the universities shall not, and I quote, persecute, belittle, or incite violence against conservative views, right? So after the No Kings protest, the White House generated an AI video of Donald Trump flying a fighter plane, dropping vast amounts of feces on peaceful demonstrators, right? That's at least belittling, right? So it's a bad faith argument. Like, I'll consider civil discourse as a universal norm if J.D. Vance and Donald Trump practiced that norm for 2 weeks. How about that? That would be a good start, right? That would be a good start. Okay. Third, meritocratic admissions, right? And so meritocratic admissions are a good idea. And I was looking with my son Alex. There's a great Crimson story this morning about the effect of admissions since the Students for Fair Admissions suit against Harvard, which Harvard lost. And some of the, I don't exactly have the statistics right. I think African American admissions went down by about 3% from 14 to 11%. Latino admissions, I think, went down by a little bit more since the year before the lawsuit. However, I think the main effect of meritocratic admissions on whether on the compact's version is going to be a dramatic increase of women in the college and of Asians. And so the Asian American or Asian admissions have gone up from 27% to 40%. Right? So, on behalf of my people, thank you, MAGA and Stephen Miller and the Students for Fair Admissions. Thank you. But so this is looking forward. I think the meritocratic thing is going to turn out to be a bad faith argument, right? It's like not the shape of higher ed campuses that Stephen Miller and May Millman have in mind. So I think that too will be jettisoned once the situation becomes a little more clear on that. Okay, so one more point, or maybe tied to Steve's question or kind of a statement about, okay, we're in a very bad situation of sliding authoritarianism, competitive authoritarianism. I think this is like a statement that I certainly think is true, but what it raises, but not everyone agrees. I guess that's the point I want to make. It's a question about situational awareness. So law firm leaders, media leaders, higher ed leaders, like what is their situational awareness, right? You could be in one world where you think, oh, there's a pretty right-wing administration, but it's kind of politics as usual. So we're going to, jockey around and do the deals that we have to do to maintain the grants, et cetera. And that's the world that we're in. It's just not that much different. It is somewhat different because they're attacking us a little bit more powerfully. But fundamentally, it's the same world that we've been in for decades. There's another possibility.
So they knocked down the east wing of the...
Right.
Business as usual.
Yeah, that hasn't happened in a few decades, right, at least. Right. The other possibility is that Steve is right, and I certainly think I'm on that we're in a second world that is relatively unprecedented, in which there is a very illiberal move from the White House and in society and in a social movement. And I think the things you do, whether you're in World I or World II, are very, very, very different. And so a lot hangs on that situational awareness. I don't know if there's any business school alums here. A famous business school professor is Clay Christensen. And one of his famous ideas is the innovator's dilemma, right? So it's like the companies and businesses and organizations get really good at one world, like they're making mainframe computers, right? And then the environment changes, but they have all of the muscles and skills that got them very successful in that world one, and they don't recognize that the world has changed. And even if they did, they wouldn't really have the muscles to thrive in that new world. And I think that may be part of the danger that we're in, and part of the reason that we're seeing the acquiescence is because people don't know that they're in World II, and they don't really have the, even if they did acknowledge that they were in World II, they wouldn't have the skills to deal with it. So a concrete Harvard case of World I versus World II. There was 2 years ago, this is before the election, the 2024 election, Harvard passed an institutional neutrality policy. We're still under that policy. I was very much against it then. I'm even more against it now. But institutional neutrality is a pretty good idea if you're in World I. Right? You're in a narrow band of politics. You kind of don't want the university to take positions. You want both to stay out of the bullseye of different partisans and to allow faculty to investigate all kinds of views. But if you're in World II, institutional neutrality is a terrible idea. But because, in part, it shackles you from taking the kinds of leadership positions in society and coalescing the forces of higher education that Crimson Courage and other people are trying to encourage, right? So World I, World II is a pretty big, important difference there. And then final point, just a sentence on this, and then we can open it up, is it's a question, I certainly don't know the answer to this question, but I think we should all think about it, is what does the Trump administration want, really, out of its fight with higher ed? One possibility is money. That's a given. It wants money. A second possibility is domination and political points. So that's the political theater. It wants people to bend the knee and recognize that people are bending the knee. A third possibility is what Steve emphasized, which is universities, campuses are spaces of political dissent and free thought, and authoritarians, that's like one thing they can't have. And that's what's happening. And I think all three of those are happening for sure. I wanted to put a fourth possibility on the table, which is that it's about cultural hegemony. And there is a radical right project that is about a vision of society and family and who's in and who's out. And that part of this agenda is about establishing that cultural hegemony, and universities and other educational institutions are a really good vehicle for doing that, right? And I think something hangs on this too, right? So if you thought that it was about political dissent or money or bending the knee, then maybe kind of, if you squint hard enough, you can say, okay, getting rid of DEI, maybe saying there can be only two genders, that's okay, because that's a little bit of maneuvering that we're doing in order to create the space to operate in this hostile political environment. But if you think it's about cultural hegemony, according to which some people are just out in the sense of like human rights not being respected out, then it's not okay to do those things. It's not a good calculus, because you think you're buying yourself some political breathing room, but what you're really doing is enforcing a kind of hierarchy that excludes some people and maybe eventually violates their human rights. Thanks.
So you touched on one of the questions we talked about, viewpoint diversity. Let me ask a question then. Think about your own questions if. And I will say on the your last point about depending on what world you're in, we at Crimson Courage are nonpartisan, and yet to be nonpartisan in a world when all of the actions are being taken by a very partisan government raises questions about how you even define that. And it's a conversation we're having, and I think the world is trying to have, is that we don't want to be partisan, which is why we're glad the Cato Institute and others and Larry Summers have spoken up about this, and yet so much of the discussion is about the actions of one specific, very partisan government. So we recognize that and live with. I think what I want to hear from you both is, so if Harvard is a leader in this effort, how much should its focus be on Harvard itself and protecting it, and how much of it needs to reach out and be part of a larger effort, basically, or maybe to gather other universities to really, what's the role of Harvard as we face this as an institution and given its role kind of in society? Do you have thoughts on that?
I think this gets back to what Archon was just talking about. It depends in part on what world you're living in, because the vast majority of university presidents, including Allen, have been, at least until very recently, have been living in World I. And if you're living in World I, then you take, and the world and the institutions of the Republic and our basic rights are not going to be destroyed, then you take care of Harvard. It's Allen's job to take care of Harvard and make sure that we have funding and take care of the institution. That is his job. And that's for every law firm, every CEO, every media company, every university that is taking care of itself has done so because it's operating in World I. The problem is, at least in my opinion, we're not operating in World I, and the result has been a massive collective action problem, right? So Alan Garber will tell you, and has told me, that there's very little that Harvard can do on its own to save democracy, but we can lose $2.5 billion if we get in a fight with Trump. So the cost-benefit calculation for Allen is we gotta negotiate. We gotta take care of Harvard, and it hasn't served us well. There's no guarantee. First of all, collective action is really difficult. We unfortunately, unlike other democracies, don't have much of an infrastructure or much of a tradition of associational life. Universities, there are no strong associations of universities as there are in other democracies. So I don't want to miscast how difficult this is. Very, very difficult. But we've had 9 months now to analyze the problem and to begin to act, and alumni are acting, and students are acting, and some faculty are acting, and a group of former university presidents is acting. But universities have done very little to try to forge a collective response. And I think it's been very, very costly.
I agree with that. I'll only add that I don't know whether, so you mentioned 7 universities out of the 9 initially asked by the Department of Justice, I guess, Department of Education to sign the Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education, have said no. 7 of 9, and then Vanderbilt and U of T, we haven't really heard from them yet. We'll see. And so I don't know whether that was collective action. I don't know whether they talked to one another, but it kind of feels like collective action because they're all saying no to the same thing. And to my mind, that is the kind of first instance of institutional collective action in higher ed, but maybe across the board. Like, I don't think we've seen it in media and law firms or businesses yet. And so that strikes me as important and hopeful in a way. Like I said, I don't know if it was actually collective action, but it feels like that. Yeah.
If there's a question here, there's a microphone right there so we can hear you, because I believe we're recording this or streaming it or...
The two worlds really strikes a chord to me. I'm here from Chicago, where about a month ago I was attending a protest and 10 ICE vehicles came by me at 45 miles an hour and I got caught in a cloud of tear gas. That does not seem like World War I. And so I guess what is our responsibility to succinctly describe World II, and how can we do that in a way that doesn't sound like Chicken Little, but in a way that is very, very urgent, succinct, and clear?
Mm. Yeah, what do you think? The evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, it's... for a growing number of Americans in different places, in different sectors of society, it's becoming much more real. Trump, in that sense, is helping us out in convincing people. It's not easy. I mean, this is one of the great difficulties of competitive authoritarianism, is that it looks normal. In fact, a lot of authoritarian regimes feel normal for most people most of the time. And so, and especially competitive authoritarian ones, because Congress is still sort of operating, and we are going to have elections. We will. And so it's very, very difficult to convince all but the most politically engaged people that something is awry. Now, troops in the streets and tear gas and masked men. I mean, it's really interesting. There are very, very few autocracies anywhere in the world that are as sort of openly and even proudly authoritarian as this one. I mean, these guys advertise it. Yeah. And I've studied authoritarian regimes mostly in Latin America for a very long time. And they may be authoritarian, but they don't want the world to know how violent and thuggish they are. They hide it. These guys are gaining political points from, and so it's very different. That is probably, though, helping to make citizens more aware of the authority, more aware that we're in World II than otherwise would happen. Viktor Orban would never do this stuff, right? It took...
Yeah, he's 15, 20 years in, right?
Hungarians are 15 years into authoritarianism, and many Hungarians still don't understand that they're in World II. Because Orban doesn't have any masked men abducting people in the streets. There are no troops in the cities. They're not indicting major opposition figures. They're doing it with velvet gloves. So in that sense, as awful as it is, that process may help us with that conversation.
Yeah, it's in part a narrative struggle, right? So we were talking before, some people probably went to one of the No Kings protests on Saturday. Yeah. And it is the narrative that Mike Johnson at least said, he had this quote that was all over the place about how it was anti-American, the Antifa, the pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party, which is to say the whole Democratic Party, was the marches. And so he set up, teed up opportunities for viral, violent videos of violent protesters. But there were none, right? I mean, how can you have 5 to 7 million people and not be able to scrounge up one melee or one Molotov cocktail? I mean, it's kind of a narrative slam dunk on the part of No Kings. So, how do you flip that narrative battle? And then, what are the opportunities that come up? I did not know that anything like Kilmar Abrego Garcia would capture the national attention of somebody who had been, kind of detained and deported, sent to El Salvador, but just a kind of family guy. What are those? I think a part of it has got to be expanding the circle of inclusion and humanity and awareness to people who are undocumented immigrants right now. Because, for some reason, the empathy seems to have stopped there in some measure, and how can you expand it out? Because pretty horrible, very horrible things are happening to whole sectors of people. We just got to consider them people.
Yeah. My name is Paul Timonaro. I'm here getting a master's of business management, and when I first started to see the administration attack the university, I thought, well, it's a pretty strong institution. We'll see what happens. But then before I started classes, I actually moved here from Chicago, and I got very ill, and I had now my beloved institution of the NIH take care of me and get me back onto a path of health, and I'm good. And then I saw the administration go after the NIH. And now I see the administration, and I have seen some really bad things and really checked them out from friends and acquaintances in Chicago, and it's quite horrifying. some of the narratives that I've seen and verified. So I really believe, how are we to really make, for me, this has become very personal. If I was an Orwellian, I'd think Trump is out for me, right? But how do we make it more personal? And I don't think that we are going to get through this until we make this personal for a good majority of the population. At least that's my theory. Thank you.
Again, I don't want to be too optimistic. This is a very big country, and for the reasons I said before, it's difficult for this process to impact people personally. But there are two processes that are fanning out more quickly than I would have thought. One is the amount of abuse, the number of people who are being touched by this government's abuse, or by just the callousness of destroying government institutions, and many more people are being affected by this than needed to be, than a smart authoritarian would have done. And so it is reaching a lot of people. It's only been 9 months. I mean, again, it's been 15 years in Hungary. And Trump, I think, has affected more people in 9 months probably than Orban has in 15 years. The other thing that's fanning out is the participation in the No Kings rallies. 5 to 7 million people in what was it, 2,800 different
2,500,
2,700. So in every state, everybody's got a family and a friendship network, and people are beginning to take on an identity. This is becoming something that people know they must do. That's part of their lives that they feel very strongly about. Most of them have a joyous, positive experience, feel they're doing something important, and they go home and they tell their family and their friends about it. And it's pretty likely that when the next one comes around, they're going to be there and they're going to bring a friend or a cousin. And so 7 million's, it's not 300 million, but that web is also expanding. And those people are also being touched personally.
Yeah. Just a little bit. One way in which this doesn't follow at least the right populist playbook is usually right populist governments give poor people a lot of stuff in the beginning. That's part of the program, right? But the opposite is happening, right? So people's Medicaid insurance premiums are going to double. People on the Obamacare connectors and so on. Who knows, what happens to VA waiting times and at the clinics. So a couple of ways in which it's different is there's no kind of populist redistribution happening at the beginning, which people often like because they need those goods, and then it's happening much more quickly than in some of the other, in many of the other cases. So in a lot of the other cases, you have the kind of frog boiling slowly issue, because the democratic backsliding is happening over years, but here it's just happening over in super fast time, and so hopefully that breaks through somewhat.
There was a question. I think she was next, right? This one here. Okay. Only because she had her hand up earlier.
Oh, thank you very much. So my name is Jennifer Safran. I have a graduate degree from Harvard from the Extension School, which is about as democratic of an institution there is, but my undergrad is from the public Ivy of the University of Michigan. Well-known school for protests, big history of protests, Students for Democratic Society, similar to the 1971, with the canisters of tear gas going all over the place. They still have the hash bash every year. And it's true, it started as a giant protest to legalize marijuana, and now it's devolved. But anyway, my question kind of is, I would hope, because Michigan likes to call itself the Harvard of the Midwest, this example that the university, Harvard, is doing, I would hope they could keep in mind that other people in the country look to them. Unfortunately, Michigan capitulated like in 48 hours. So that's why they're not in the compact. They already capitulated. So they have an endowment of, I believe, $17 billion. It's fairly sizable. They do major research, that some of which saved my own mother's life. She got in a clinical trial, first person, and she lived 17 years after that for cancer. And I believe their budget was getting cut with $17 million. So within the deal is that they had to cut all their DEI. And they had an annual budget of $250 million on DEI, and they cut it like that. What they did is they said they would take that money and use it all for needs-based scholarships. So that was their compromise. But it was a little too fast, too easy, just kind of roll over. This is from the data from the Detroit Free Press. I do not get any info from their alumni society because it's a different structure. You pay for membership. It's not automatic like it is at Harvard. But I understand the problem President Garber has, and he has to save Harvard. That's his primary job. But I would hope Crimson Courage can keep an eye out to the other universities who may not be saying it, but they are looking to what happens in Cambridge. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or if there's, or that you just heard my little, soapbox sermon. So I don't know what you want to say to that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for all you're doing, by the way, all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you should, I don't know if Miles or Patty want to talk about the
I think that's
cross-university
exactly
effort.
right. I think we all recognize, all of us who are that Harvard cannot do this alone, which is what I think all the research shows. And also, we don't want them to do it alone. And the fact is, all of this hurts people, and the attack on Harvard, if you have a grant at NIH, the funneled through Harvard Medical School, it may be used in 17 different states, and it may be, it's going to now. And literally helping solve Alzheimer's, let's say, across the country. What has that got to do with attacking Harvard or anti-Semitism or anything else? It's clearly just a pretext, as was said. But just so you know, we at Crimson Courage are aware of that. We're engaged, as Miles said, in trying to help. And any of you, how many of you here have an affiliation with another institution? All right. I'm a Yale SOM, grad school management, so there's a stand-up Yale group. Like, call that institution, say, hey, do you have a Harvard Crimson group? Call them and say, stand the way Harvard is. That's how we get the word out. And particularly the public universities and also community colleges, they're all under attack. This is an attack on really free inquiry, science, and as I say, we keep coming back to academic freedom. So I hope that answers a little bit yours.
This is our last question.
Is that the last question? Okay.
Thank you so much to all of you. I am a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education last year and fellow with the Center for Public Leadership at the Kennedy School. So I appreciate so much your being here, your courage, your outspokenness, and honesty about really the kind of attack on freedom of speech that we're seeing and how it's affecting also faculty within the institution. I'm really sorry to hear about the death threats in particular. And I wanted to ask about, you had mentioned, Archon, Fung, about the way that the discovery, kind of the threat of like discovery being made on the university, how has that affected internal communications, especially written communications? And have you seen a shift in the way faculty communicate with one another? You're both faculty. What are the implications for human rights and right of freedom of speech?
Yeah. I mean, I think we should both address that. So the faculty that I know use Signal a lot more than they did before, for sure. Like, absolutely. So that is present. I can't speak to how administrators are communicating other than, as a recipient. And I think the volume of communication is quite restricted. But, those are a couple of indicators.
No, I was going to say the same thing. So I used to have email conversations occasionally or back and forth with Alan or other university administrators. Now,
Zip.
Nothing. If I'm not in a room face-to-face with him, we don't exchange ideas. And yes, faculty are are communicating. Anybody who's engaging in any sort of public debate or activism or discussions around Harvard and the Trump administration, that is happening on Signal.
Yeah. On this very point, we're not quite there yet internally, but we might not be that far away. I don't know if you've talked to scholars, Chinese scholars, or scholars who used to work in Eastern Europe before the fall, but it was all the ones I talked to, I get the sense that in an authoritarian regime, you can say stuff and you can do stuff, but people are either self-consciously or unconsciously aware of what the lines are and what the words are. And so I was actually thinking about having a seminar with some Chinese scholars to come and talk about that dance, because I think it's not really happening in the democracy space yet, and I hope it never does. But like in the DEI space, I don't know about that. I think the scholarship, there's a little bit of pressure there. But on the administration side, I think you'd be very, very hard put to find an administrator at Harvard who would stand up and use the words, "I'm for diversity, inclusion, and belonging." I think that would be, my guess
incredible.
is you
It's
just
incredible.
wouldn't see that. Yeah.
We've got, and there's an Orwellian component. To the extent that we get email communications from the administration, they are the worst kind of word salad that you can imagine times 3. I mean, it is the email that we got about. Do you remember the name of the renamed DEI program? It's now the Center for Culture and
Yeah.
Hopi Hoekstra, bless her, not her fault. Sent us an email.
Yeah, it's a pressure.
Sent an email that incomprehensible. A page and a half of language. I do not know what this institution does. I have a PhD, and I could not understand. I mean, because they're so terrified and so constrained in what they can say that they're writing gibberish and sending it to tenured Harvard faculty.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an embarrassment.
Yeah. It's kind of
I
incredible.
gotta say, it's particularly ironic, diversity, and yet universities are being told you need diversity viewpoint. Who is opposed to equity? The word, the concept. Who is opposed to including people? But it has become a word. So I think we're supposed to close out, right?
We are.
Okay. So remember, Crimson Courage, but wherever else you have an affiliation with, call those, write to that institution and say, stand with Harvard, stand with MIT, stand with all the universities, and thank you both so much. I really learned.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Keep up the great work.
Yeah. Hang in there.
And may I say to all of you who are here, within a couple of weeks, this will be on video on our website. We encourage you to watch it again, to share it with everyone you know, because we really are trying to expand our community. So thank you so much.
And we thank you, Harvard Club. Yay!
Yeah, thank you.
That was great.
I feel like these days I'm less careful and saying more in